Stop everything you think you know about evolution, because we're about to shatter the biggest lie you've been told since childhood. If humans came from chimps, then why the hell are chimps still swinging from trees while we're building rockets? The truth is so much stranger and more beautiful than this oversimplified fairy tale. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at your closest animal relative the same way again. But first, if mind-bending evolutionary secrets are your thing, smash that subscribe button for the sleepy cosmos, because we're about to take your understanding of life itself and flip it completely upside down. Picture this. You're at a family reunion, and someone points to your cousin and asks, "If you came from your cousin, why is your cousin still here?" You'd laugh at how ridiculous that sounds, right? Yet millions of people ask this exact same question about humans and chimpanzees every single day, completely unaware that they've just exposed one of the most fundamental misunderstandings about how life on Earth actually works. This isn't just a simple mistake. It's a misconception so deeply rooted in our culture that it's been passed down through generations like some kind of scientific urban legend. And it reveals something truly shocking about how we've been taught to think about our own existence. The truth is, the idea that humans evolved from chimpanzees is not just wrong. It's catastrophically wrong in a way that completely distorts our understanding of what evolution actually is. When Charles Darwin first proposed his theory of evolution in 1859, he never once suggested that humans descended from modern apes. In fact, Darwin was incredibly careful with his language, stating that humans and apes shared a common ancestor, a statement that was revolutionary enough to shake the very foundations of Victorian society. But somewhere along the way, this nuanced scientific understanding got twisted into a simplistic, linear narrative that makes about as much sense as saying you descended from your brother. What's even more mind-blowing is that this misconception has created what scientists call the ladder fallacy. The idea that evolution works like a ladder, with simple organisms at the bottom, gradually climbing up to more advanced forms, with humans triumphantly sitting at the top. This mental image is so compelling and so easy to understand that it's become the default way most people think about evolution. But here's the thing that will absolutely shatter your worldview. Evolution doesn't work like a ladder at all. It works like a tree, a massive, sprawling, incredibly complex tree with millions of branches spreading out in every direction, where every single living thing on Earth, from bacteria to blue whales, sits at the end of their own unique branch. This ladder fallacy has done something truly insidious to our understanding of life itself. It's made us think in terms of higher and lower organisms, as if a chimpanzee is somehow less evolved than a human, or as if evolution has some kind of ultimate goal or direction. But evolution has no goal, no plan, and no hierarchy. A bacteria that's been living in a deep ocean thermal vent for millions of years is just as evolved as you are. It's just evolved for a completely different environment and lifestyle. The bacteria isn't trying to become human any more than you're trying to become a bacteria. When you really start to grasp this concept, it leads to some absolutely staggering realizations. Every single organism alive today, including you, including the chimpanzees in African forests, including the microscopic organisms living in your gut right now, represents an unbroken chain of successful reproduction stretching back nearly 4 billion years. Think about that for a moment. 4 billion years of your ancestors successfully surviving long enough to reproduce. passing their genes forward through ice ages, asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, and countless other catastrophes that wiped out entire species. You are literally the product of the greatest survival story ever told, and so is every other living thing on this planet. But here's where things get really wild. If you could somehow travel back in time and meet the common ancestor that you share with chimpanzees, you probably wouldn't recognize it as being related to either humans or chimps. This ancestor, which lived somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago in Africa, was neither human nor chimpanzee. It was something entirely different, something that had the potential to become both. Imagine a single population of early primates living in the forests of ancient Africa, completely unaware that their descendants would one day split into two radically different evolutionary paths. The shocking truth is that humans didn't evolve from chimpanzees any more than you evolved from your cousin. Instead, humans and chimpanzees both evolved from a shared ancestor, diverging along separate evolutionary paths for millions of years until they became the distinct species we see today. This means that chimpanzees are not our ancestors. They're our evolutionary cousins, and they've been evolving and changing just as much as we have over the past 6 million years. The chimpanzees you see today are not the same as the chimpanzees that existed millions of years ago, just as humans today are not the same as our ancient ancestors. What makes this even more incredible is that we can actually trace this evolutionary relationship through multiple lines of evidence that all point to the same conclusion. Our DNA tells the story of our shared heritage. Humans and chimpanzees share approximately 98.8% of their DNA, making them our closest living relatives. But that remaining 1.2% difference represents millions of years of separate evolution, millions of generations of genetic changes that accumulated to create two completely different ways of being a primate. The fossil record tells the same story, showing us glimpses of our ancient relatives and helping us piece together the complex branching pattern of primate evolution. Perhaps most shocking of all is the realization that this misconception about human evolution has shaped not just how we think about our relationship to other animals, but how we think about ourselves as a species. The latter fallacy has created a false sense of superiority, a belief that we're somehow the goal or end point of evolution, when in reality, we're just one branch among millions on the tree of life. We're not evolution's greatest achievement. We're just evolution's latest experiment in being human, just as chimpanzees are evolution's latest experiment in being chimpanzees. This fundamental misunderstanding has profound implications for how we view our place in the natural world. When we see ourselves as the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement, we tend to view other species as somehow less than us, as failed attempts at becoming human. But when we understand that we're all just different solutions to the challenge of survival, we begin to see the incredible diversity of life on Earth as a testament to evolution's creativity rather than a hierarchy of success and failure. Every species that exists today, from the tiniest insect to the largest whale, represents a unique evolutionary experiment that has proven successful enough to survive to the present day. The truth about evolution and our relationship to chimpanzees is so much more beautiful and complex than the simple story we've been told. It's a story of branching paths and endless possibilities, of shared heritage and divergent destinies, of two species that started from the same place and ended up exploring completely different ways of being alive. Understanding this truth doesn't diminish our uniqueness as humans. It enhances it, showing us that we're part of an incredible web of life that connects us not just to chimpanzees, but to every living thing on Earth. Prepare to have your mind completely blown by one of the most shocking discoveries in the history of science. A revelation so profound that it literally rewrote our understanding of what it means to be human. In 2005, scientists completed one of the most ambitious projects ever undertaken, sequencing the complete genome of our closest living relative, the chimpanzee. What they found was so startling, so incredibly precise, that it sent shockwaves through the scientific community and fundamentally changed how we understand our place in the tree of life. The numbers were staggering. Humans and chimpanzees share 98.8% of their DNA. But here's the part that will absolutely destroy everything you thought you knew about evolution. That tiny 1.2% difference represents the accumulated genetic changes from approximately 6 to 7 million years of separate evolutionary history. To put this in perspective that will make your head spin, you are more genetically similar to a chimpanzee than a chimpanzee is to a gorilla. Let that sink in for a moment. Despite the fact that chimpanzees and gorillas are both African apes living in similar environments, despite the fact that they look more similar to each other than either looks to us, you, a human being who builds skyscrapers and sends rockets to Mars, are genetically closer to a chimpanzee than that chimpanzee is to its fellow ape. This isn't just a minor scientific curiosity. It's a fundamental revelation about how recently our evolutionary paths diverged and how incredibly close we still are to our primate cousins. But here's where things get absolutely mind-bending. The relationship between humans and chimpanzees is so close that some scientists have seriously proposed that chimpanzees should be reclassified into the genus Homo, the same genus as humans. Think about the implications of this for a moment. According to the standard rules of biological classification, chimpanzees might actually belong in the same genus as humans, making them not just our closest relatives, but our actual genus mates. The only reason this reclassification hasn't happened is because of the enormous cultural and philosophical implications it would have for how we define ourselves as a species. The family tree revelation gets even more shocking when you realize that the genetic distance between humans and chimpanzees is smaller than the genetic distance between many species that we consider to be closely related. For example, the genetic difference between a horse and a donkey is greater than the genetic difference between you and a chimpanzee. Yet horses and donkeys can interbreed and produce offspring, mules, while humans and chimpanzees cannot. This paradox reveals something absolutely fascinating about how evolution works at the genetic level and why genetic similarity doesn't always translate directly into reproductive compatibility. What's even more staggering is that when scientists began mapping the human and chimpanzee genomes side by side, they discovered that large chunks of DNA are virtually identical between the two species. Entire genes that control fundamental biological processes are so similar that they're essentially interchangeable. In fact, scientists have successfully used chimpanzee genes to replace human genes in laboratory experiments, and the chimpanzee genes function perfectly in human cells. This means that at the most basic molecular level, the machinery of life that keeps you alive right now is almost indistinguishable from the machinery that keeps chimpanzees alive. But here's the truly mind-blowing part. Despite this incredible genetic similarity, the small differences that do exist have had absolutely profound effects on how our two species developed. That tiny 1.2% genetic difference has been amplified through millions of years of evolution to create two radically different ways of being a primate. It's like having two identical recipes where you change just a few ingredients, but those small changes result in completely different dishes. The genetic differences between humans and chimpanzees are concentrated in areas that control brain development, immune system function, and reproductive biology. Precisely the areas where we see the most dramatic differences between our two species. One of the most shocking discoveries to come out of this genetic comparison was the realization that chimpanzees have actually undergone more genetic changes than humans since our species split apart. This completely destroys the common misconception that humans have been evolving while chimpanzees have remained static. The truth is exactly the opposite. Chimpanzees have been evolving at a faster rate than humans in many areas of their genome. They've been adapting to their forest environments, developing specialized digestive systems for processing raw plant materials, and evolving sophisticated social behaviors that are perfectly suited to their ecological niche. The family tree revelation also uncovered something absolutely incredible about the timing of our split from chimpanzees. Using molecular clocks, a technique that measures the rate of genetic changes over time, scientists determined that humans and chimpanzees last shared a common ancestor between 6 and 7 million years ago. But here's the part that will blow your mind. This split wasn't a clean break. The genetic evidence suggests that our early human ancestors and early chimpanzee ancestors continued to interbreed for hundreds of thousands of years, years after the initial split, creating a complex pattern of genetic mixing that makes the early stages of human evolution much more complicated than we previously imagined. This continued interbreeding has left traces in our genome that tell an incredible story of evolutionary experimentation. There are sections of human DNA that show clear signs of ancient hybridization with our chimpanzee cousins, genetic signatures of a time when the boundaries between our species were still fluid and permeable. These genomic fossils reveal that the separation between humans and chimpanzees wasn't a sudden event, but rather a gradual process that took place over hundreds of thousands of years, with multiple populations diverging and occasionally reuniting before finally splitting apart for good. What makes this even more extraordinary is that we can trace the specific genetic changes that have accumulated in each lineage since the split. Scientists have identified hundreds of genes that have undergone rapid evolution in the human lineage, many of them related to brain development and cognitive function. But equally fascinating are the genes that have undergone rapid evolution in the chimpanzee lineage, genes related to immune system function, digestive efficiency, and muscle development. This reveals that both species have been under intense evolutionary pressure since the split, each adapting to their specific environmental challenges and developing unique solutions to the problems of survival and reproduction. The family tree revelation has also uncovered something truly shocking about human genetic diversity. Despite our global population of nearly 8 billion people, all humans are remarkably genetically similar to each other. Much more similar than would be expected for a species of our size and geographic distribution. In fact, there is more genetic diversity within a single chimpanzee community in Africa than there is in the entire human species worldwide. This suggests that humans went through a severe population bottleneck at some point in our evolutionary history, a time when our entire species was reduced to perhaps as few as a few thousand individuals. This genetic bottleneck has profound implications for understanding human evolution and our relationship to chimpanzees. It suggests that while chimpanzee populations have remained relatively stable and genetically diverse throughout their evolutionary history, early humans faced some kind of catastrophic event that nearly drove our species to extinction. The fact that we survived this bottleneck and went on to colonize the entire planet is one of the most remarkable survival stories in the history of life on Earth. Perhaps most shocking of all is the realization that the family tree connecting humans and chimpanzees is still being written. Both species are continuing to evolve, accumulating new genetic changes and adapting to new environmental pressures. The chimpanzees living in African forests today are not the same as the chimpanzees that lived there 1,000 years ago, just as humans today are not identical to humans from 1,000 years ago. Evolution never stops, and the genetic distance between our two species continues to grow with each passing generation, slowly but inexorably carrying us further apart on the branches of the tree of life. Imagine for a moment that you could travel back in time 7 million years to witness one of the most consequential moments in the history of life on Earth, a moment so pivotal that it would ultimately determine whether intelligence would arise on our planet or remain forever locked away in the minds of forest-dwelling apes. Picture the ancient landscapes of Africa, a continent that looked nothing like the Africa we know today, where vast forests stretched across regions that are now scorching deserts, and where a single population of early primates lived completely unaware that they were about to become the ancestors of two radically different evolutionary experiments. This wasn't just any ordinary moment in natural history. This was the moment when the lineage that would eventually produce you began its 7 million year journey toward becoming human, while simultaneously setting in motion the evolutionary forces that would shape chimpanzees into the remarkable creatures we see today. The Africa of 7 million years ago was a world that would be completely unrecognizable to us now. A landscape shaped by geological forces so powerful that they literally split a continent in two and created the conditions for one of the most important evolutionary divergences in the history of life. During this time, massive tectonic forces were tearing through the heart of Africa, creating what we now know as the Great Rift Valley, a geological scar that stretches over 3,000 miles from Ethiopia to Mozambique. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind. This wasn't just a gradual geological process that took millions of years. The most dramatic rifting episodes happened relatively quickly in geological terms, sometimes over periods of just thousands of years, creating sudden and dramatic changes in the landscape that had profound effects on the animals living there. What makes this geological transformation so incredibly significant is that it didn't just change the physical landscape. It completely revolutionized the climate and ecosystem of Eastern Africa in ways that would prove absolutely crucial for human evolution. As the Rift Valley formed, it created a massive barrier that blocked moisture-laden winds from the Indian Ocean, creating what scientists call a rain shadow effect. This meant that the eastern side of the rift gradually became drier and more open, while the western side remained lush and forested. In other words, a single geological event literally split Africa into two different worlds. One that would favor the evolution of forest-adapted apes, and another that would select for something entirely different. Here's where the story gets absolutely mind-bending. The population of early primates that lived in Africa before this split found themselves suddenly living in two completely different environments. The Western populations, which would eventually give rise to modern chimpanzees and bonobos, continued to live in dense forests, where swinging through trees remained the optimal way to move around and find food. But the Eastern populations faced an entirely different challenge. Their forest home was gradually disappearing, replaced by increasingly open woodlands and savannas where the old strategies for survival would no longer work. The timing of this split is so precise and so perfectly documented in the geological record that it reads like something out of a science fiction novel. Sediment cores taken from the bottom of ancient lakes show exactly when the climate began to shift, and fossil evidence reveals how different species of early hominins began to appear in eastern Africa right around the same time. This isn't coincidence. This is cause and effect on a geological scale, where the movement of tectonic plates literally shaped the course of evolution and determined which species would develop the traits that would eventually lead to human intelligence. But here's something that will completely shatter your understanding of how evolution works. The split between human and chimpanzee ancestors wasn't a clean, one-time event. Recent genetic analysis has revealed something absolutely shocking. Our ancestors and chimpanzee ancestors continued to interbreed for hundreds of thousands of years after the initial geographical separation. This means that for nearly 1 million years after the African split, the boundaries between what would become humans and what would become chimpanzees remained fluid and permeable. Populations on either side of the Rift Valley occasionally came back into contact, exchanging genes and creating a complex web of evolutionary relationships that we're only now beginning to understand. The evidence for this prolonged period of interbreeding is written directly into our DNA in ways that are so specific and detailed that they read like a historical record of ancient Africa. Scientists have identified sections of the human genome that show clear signatures of ancient hybridization with chimpanzee ancestors, genetic markers that can only be explained by periods of renewed contact between populations that had been geographically separated for thousands of years. This reveals that the early stages of human evolution were far messier and more complex than we previously imagined, with multiple populations experimenting with different evolutionary strategies before finally committing to separate paths. What's even more incredible is that we can actually trace the specific environmental pressures that were acting on these early populations as Africa continued to change around them. Isotope analysis of ancient soils reveals exactly how the vegetation changed over time, showing a gradual transition from closed forest canopies to increasingly open woodlands. Fossil pollen records tell the same story, documenting the disappearance of forest species and the appearance of grassland plants that would have created entirely new ecological niches for early hominins to exploit. The eastern populations that would eventually become our ancestors faced environmental challenges that had never existed before in primate evolution. As the forests thinned and disappeared, these early hominins had to adapt to a world where food resources were more widely scattered, where water became increasingly scarce, and where the protective canopy of trees no longer provided safety from predators. These challenges required completely new solutions, new ways of moving across the landscape, new strategies for finding and processing food, and new forms of social cooperation that would allow groups to survive in increasingly harsh and unpredictable environments. Perhaps most shocking of all is the realization that the African split created not just the conditions for human evolution, but also the conditions that would shape chimpanzee evolution in equally profound ways. While we often think chimpanzees as somehow primitive or unchanged since the split, the truth is that chimpanzees have been evolving just as dramatically as humans, developing their own unique adaptations to forest life. The dense forests of Western Africa, selected for incredible upper body strength, sophisticated tool use for extracting insects and nuts, and complex social hierarchies that allow large groups to coordinate their activities in three-dimensional forest environments. The genetic evidence reveals that chimpanzees have actually undergone more rapid evolution than humans in many areas of their genome, particularly in genes related to immune system function and digestive efficiency. This makes perfect sense when you consider the challenges of forest life, the constant exposure to parasites and pathogens, the need to process large quantities of fibrous plant material, and the requirements for maintaining social cohesion in groups that can contain dozens of individuals with complex, shifting relationships. What makes the African split even more remarkable is that it created the conditions not just for one, but for multiple experiments in hominin evolution. The fossil record from Eastern Africa reveals an incredible diversity of early human ancestors, each representing a different evolutionary solution to the challenges of life in increasingly open environments. Species like Australopithecus afarensis, Paranthropus boisei, and Homo habilis all evolved different strategies for survival, from massive grinding teeth for processing tough plant materials to increasingly sophisticated tool use for accessing new food sources. The split also created the conditions for one of the most important innovations in human evolution: bipedalism. As forests gave way to more open environments, the ability to walk upright across open ground became increasingly advantageous, allowing early hominins to travel efficiently between scattered food sources while keeping their hands free for carrying tools and food. This single adaptation would prove to be one of the most consequential changes in the entire history of life, setting the stage for everything from tool use to brain expansion to the eventual development of language and culture. The African split reveals evolution in action on a scale that's both humbling and awe-inspiring, showing how geological processes that operate over millions of years can shape the course of biological evolution in ways that ultimately determine which species develop intelligence and which remain locked into more primitive ways of life. The fact that we can trace this entire process through multiple lines of evidence, geological, climatological, and genetic, gives us an unprecedented window into how major evolutionary transitions actually occur in the real world. Here's something that will completely revolutionize how you think about human evolution. The difference between humans and chimpanzees isn't just about genetics or time. It's about two radically different worlds that shape two completely different survival strategies over millions of years. While our chimpanzee cousins continued to thrive in the dense, resource-rich forests of Western Africa, our human ancestors found themselves thrust into one of the most challenging and unforgiving environments on Earth. the increasingly arid and unpredictable landscapes of Eastern Africa. But here's the mind-blowing part. It wasn't the gentle, gradual environmental changes that forged us into humans. It was catastrophe, crisis, and near-extinction events that pushed our ancestors to develop the very traits that make us uniquely human today. The environmental pressures that shaped human evolution were so extreme and so relentless that they created what scientists call an evolutionary pressure cooker, conditions so harsh that only the most adaptable, intelligent, and cooperative individuals could survive. Between 7 million and 2 million years ago, Eastern Africa experienced some of the most dramatic climate fluctuations in Earth's recent history. Temperature swings of 10 to 15 degrees Celsius happened within timeframes of just a few thousand years, transforming lush woodlands into barren savannas and back again in cycles that would have been absolutely devastating to any species unable to adapt quickly to changing conditions. What makes these environmental pressures so incredibly significant is that they weren't just challenging. They were specifically the kind of challenges that selected for intelligence, cooperation, and behavioral flexibility. Unlike the stable forest environments where chimpanzees evolved, the changing landscapes of Eastern Africa created situations where traditional ape behaviors simply couldn't work. When your food sources disappeared overnight due to climate shifts, when water became scarce and unpredictable, when new predators appeared in environments that no longer offered the safety of tree cover, survival required entirely new kinds of thinking and problem-solving abilities. Here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. Scientists have discovered that the periods of most rapid human evolution correspond almost perfectly with the periods of greatest environmental instability in Africa. Using sophisticated climate modeling and analysis of ancient lake sediments, researchers have been able to create detailed maps of environmental change over the past several million years. What they found is shocking. Every major leap forward in human evolution, from the development of bipedalism to the expansion of brain size to the invention of stone tools, happened during periods when the African climate was in chaos. The most dramatic example of this environmental pressure occurred around 2.8 million years ago during what scientists call the Great African Aridification. This wasn't just a gradual drying trend. It was a catastrophic shift that transformed vast regions of Eastern Africa from woodland to desert in just a few 100,000 years. The fossil record from this period tells an incredible story of evolutionary innovation under extreme pressure. This is when we see the first appearance of genus Homo, the first evidence of systematic tool-making, and the first signs of the dietary flexibility that would eventually allow humans to colonize every environment on Earth. But here's what's truly mind-bending about these environmental pressures. They didn't just select for physical adaptations, like stronger legs for walking or better teeth for chewing tough foods. They selected for cognitive abilities that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. The unpredictable nature of the changing African landscape meant that our ancestors couldn't rely on instinct or simple behavioral patterns to survive. They had to develop the ability to plan ahead, to imagine future scenarios, to remember complex environmental patterns, and to communicate sophisticated information to other members of their group. The contrast with chimpanzee environments during this same period is absolutely staggering. While our human ancestors were struggling to survive in increasingly harsh and unpredictable conditions, Chimpanzees were living in what can only be described as a primate paradise. The dense forests of Western and Central Africa remained relatively stable throughout the periods of dramatic change in the East. Food was abundant and predictable. Water was readily available, and the three-dimensional forest environment provided endless opportunities for the kind of complex social behaviors that chimpanzees are famous for. This environmental stability had profound effects on chimpanzee evolution, but in ways that are completely different from what happened to humans. Instead of being pushed toward greater intelligence and technological innovation, chimpanzees were able to refine and perfect their existing adaptations to forest life. They developed incredible upper body strength for moving through trees, sophisticated tool use for extracting insects and nuts from hard-to-reach places, and complex social hierarchies that allow large groups to coordinate their activities without the need for advanced communication systems. What's particularly fascinating is that we can actually measure the different evolutionary pressures that humans and chimpanzees experienced by looking at the rates of change in their respective genomes. Genes related to brain development and cognitive function show signs of extremely rapid evolution in the human lineage during periods of environmental instability, while these same genes remained relatively unchanged in chimpanzees. Conversely, genes related to muscle development, immune system function, and digestive efficiency show rapid evolution in chimpanzees but not in humans, reflecting their ongoing adaptation to forest environments rich in diverse pathogens and difficult to digest plant materials. Perhaps the most shocking discovery about these environmental pressures is that they created a feedback loop that accelerated human evolution at an unprecedented rate. As our ancestors developed better tools and more sophisticated hunting strategies, they were able to access new food sources and survive in even harsher environments. This, in turn, exposed them to new challenges that selected for even greater intelligence and cooperation. The result was what scientists call runaway evolution, a process where each adaptive innovation made possible even greater innovations in an accelerating cycle of evolutionary change. The environmental pressures of ancient Africa also explain one of the most puzzling aspects of human evolution: why we became such extreme social cooperators compared to other primates. While chimpanzees live in complex social groups, their societies are ultimately based on individual competition and hierarchical dominance. Human societies, by contrast, are based on unprecedented levels of cooperation, sharing, and mutual support. This difference isn't accidental. It's the direct result of environmental pressures that made cooperation essential for survival. In the harsh and unpredictable environments of Eastern Africa, no individual could survive alone. Finding food required coordinated group efforts, defending against predators required collective action, and surviving periods of scarcity required complex systems of resource sharing that had never evolved before in any primate species. These environmental pressures literally shape the neural circuits in our brains that make us capable of empathy, altruism, and the kind of large-scale cooperation that allows modern human societies to function. The environmental pressures that shaped human evolution were so specific and so extreme that they created what amounts to a unique evolutionary experiment. Never before in the history of life had environmental instability selected so strongly for intelligence, cooperation, and behavioral flexibility in a single lineage. The result was the rapid evolution of cognitive abilities that allowed our ancestors not just to adapt to changing environments, but to actively modify their environments to suit their needs. What makes this even more remarkable is that we can see evidence of these environmental pressures written into the very structure of the human brain. The enlarged prefrontal cortex that gives us our capacity for planning and abstract thinking. The enhanced language centers that allow us to communicate complex information. The mirror neuron systems that enable us to understand and cooperate with others. All of these neural innovations can be traced back to specific environmental challenges that our ancestors faced in ancient Africa. The story of environmental pressures reveals that human intelligence isn't just a happy accident of evolution. It's the direct result of millions of years of survival in one of the most challenging environments ever faced by any primate species. While chimpanzees were able to perfect their adaptations to stable forest environments, humans were forged in the crucible of environmental chaos, developing the cognitive tools that would eventually allow us to not just survive in hostile environments, but to transform the entire planet to suit our needs. This understanding completely changes how we think about our relationship to chimpanzees and to the natural world. We're not superior to chimpanzees. We're simply the products of different environmental pressures that selected for different kinds of intelligence and different survival strategies. Both humans and chimpanzees represent successful solutions to the challenge of survival. Just solutions that evolved under radically different conditions and in response to completely different environmental pressures. Prepare yourself for one of the most shocking revelations in the entire story of human evolution, a discovery so mind-bending that it completely overturns everything you thought you knew about why humans began walking upright. For decades, scientists believed that bipedalism evolved because our ancestors moved from forests to open savannas and needed to walk long distances between scattered trees. This seemed logical, straightforward, and perfectly reasonable. But here's what will absolutely shatter your understanding of human evolution. This entire explanation is wrong. Dead wrong. The real reason our ancestors stood up and began walking on two legs is so unexpected, so counterintuitive, and so brilliant that it reveals evolution to be far more creative and opportunistic than we ever imagined. The truth about bipedalism begins with a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community in the 1990s. Scientists studying the fossil remains of our earliest upright walking ancestors made a stunning observation. These early bipeds weren't living in open savannas at all. They were living in dense forests, surrounded by trees, in environments that were virtually identical to where chimpanzees live today. This means that our ancestors didn't start walking upright because they had to cross open ground. They started walking upright while they were still living in the trees. This discovery completely demolished the savanna hypothesis and forced scientists to ask a fundamental question. If early humans weren't walking across open grasslands, why on earth did they start walking upright? The answer to this question is so ingenious that it reveals evolution's ability to find solutions that no engineer would ever think of. Our ancestors didn't start walking upright to travel long distances on the ground. They started walking upright to move more efficiently through the trees themselves. Here's the mind-blowing part. As Africa's climate began to change and forests became more fragmented, the trees didn't disappear all at once. Instead, they became smaller, more widely spaced, and less stable. The thick, reliable branches that chimpanzees use for knuckle walking were becoming thinner and more flexible, unable to support the weight of a large ape moving on all fours. But here's where our ancestors made an evolutionary breakthrough that was absolutely revolutionary. They discovered that they could move through these smaller, more flexible branches by standing upright and walking along them, using their arms for balance rather than support. This technique, which scientists call orthograde walking, allowed early hominins to access parts of the forest canopy that were completely inaccessible to their quadrupedal cousins. While chimpanzees were limited to the thick, stable branches near the tree trunks, our bipedal ancestors could venture out onto the thin, flexible branches at the very tips of trees where the best fruits and youngest leaves were located. What makes this discovery even more incredible is that we can actually observe this behavior in modern primates today. Some populations of orangutans in Borneo have been observed walking upright along flexible branches. And when scientists analyzed their movements, they found that bipedal walking was up to 75% more energy efficient than quadrupedal movement on unstable surfaces. This means that bipedalism didn't evolve despite the forest environment. It evolved because of the forest environment as a specialized adaptation for accessing resources that other apes couldn't reach. The implications of this discovery are absolutely staggering. It means that our ancestors developed one of the most distinctive human characteristics, upright walking, not as a response to leaving the trees, but as a way to exploit the trees more effectively than any other primate. This gave them access to food sources that were unavailable to chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans, providing a crucial competitive advantage during periods when forest resources were becoming increasingly scarce due to climate change. But here's where the story gets even more shocking. Once our ancestors had mastered the art of bipedal locomotion in the trees, this same adaptation turned out to be incredibly useful for moving on the ground as well. When they did eventually descend from the increasingly fragmented forest canopy, they already possessed the anatomical and neurological equipment necessary for efficient ground-based bipedalism. This is what scientists call evolutionary pre-adaptation, the development of traits for one purpose that turn out to be incredibly useful for completely different purposes. The transition from arboreal bipedalism to terrestrial bipedalism required some additional anatomical modifications, but the basic framework was already in place. The changes needed to transform a tree-walking biped into a ground-walking biped were relatively minor compared to the massive reorganization that would have been required to transform a quadrupedal ape directly into a terrestrial biped. This explains why bipedalism evolved so relatively quickly in the human lineage. The hard work of developing the basic bipedal body plan had already been done in the trees. What's absolutely mind-bending about this evolutionary sequence is that it reveals how environmental change can create entirely new ecological niches that select for completely novel adaptations. The fragmentation of African forests didn't just eliminate old ways of life. It created new opportunities for species that could develop innovative solutions to unprecedented challenges. Our ancestors were essentially evolutionary entrepreneurs, discovering and exploiting a new way of moving through the world that no primate had ever attempted before. The advantages of bipedalism became even more pronounced as our ancestors began spending more time on the ground. Walking upright freed their hands for carrying tools, weapons, and food, allowing them to transport resources over long distances and accumulate supplies in ways that were impossible for quadrupedal apes. This cargo-carrying capacity was absolutely crucial for survival in the increasingly patchy and unpredictable environments of changing Africa, where successful foraging often required traveling long distances between scattered resource patches. Bipedalism also provided significant thermoregulatory advantages that were crucial for survival in the more open environments where our ancestors found themselves. When you walk upright, you expose less surface area to the intense African sun, and you position your body to take maximum advantage of cooling breezes. This might seem like a minor benefit, but in environments where overheating could be fatal, these thermoregulatory advantages could mean the difference between life and death during the hottest parts of the day. Perhaps most importantly, bipedalism fundamentally changed how our ancestors interacted with their environment and with each other. Standing upright elevated their heads above the level of tall grass and low bushes, giving them a crucial advantage in spotting both predators and prey from a distance. This enhanced visual surveillance capability was absolutely essential for survival in increasingly open environments where the protective cover of dense forest was no longer available. The social implications of bipedalism were equally profound. Upright posture changed the entire dynamics of social interaction, making face-to-face communication more natural and allowing for more sophisticated forms of gestural communication. The freed hands could be used for more complex tool manipulation and for carrying objects that could be shared with other group members, facilitating the kind of resource sharing and cooperation that became increasingly important for survival in harsh environments. What makes the evolution of bipedalism even more remarkable is that it required the coordination of changes in dozens of different anatomical systems. The spine had to develop new curves to maintain balance in an upright posture. The pelvis had to be completely redesigned to support the weight of the upper body. The leg bones had to be strengthened and repositioned. The foot had to develop an arch structure for efficient ground contact. The inner ear had to be modified to maintain balance in a vertical orientation. The fact that all of these changes happened in a coordinated fashion over a relatively short period of evolutionary time is nothing short of miraculous. The story of bipedalism reveals evolution at its most creative and opportunistic, showing how environmental challenges can drive the development of entirely new ways of being alive. Our ancestors didn't just adapt to changing conditions. They invented completely new solutions that no other primate had ever attempted. This innovation gave them access to resources and opportunities that were unavailable to their competitors, setting the stage for all of the subsequent developments that would eventually lead to human intelligence, culture, and technology. Understanding the true story of bipedalism completely changes how we think about human uniqueness and our relationship to other primates. We're not unique because we left the trees. We're unique because we found a completely new way to live in the trees that eventually allowed us to conquer the ground as well. This reveals humans to be not just another species of ape, but evolutionary innovators who discovered and exploited opportunities that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. Here's a revelation that will completely revolutionize how you understand the divergence between humans and chimpanzees. While we've been obsessing over human intelligence as our species' greatest achievement, we've been ignoring an equally spectacular evolutionary feat happening in our chimpanzee cousins. Chimpanzees didn't fail to develop human-like brains. They chose a completely different evolutionary strategy that's so effective, so perfectly optimized for their environment, that it puts our own physical capabilities to shame. The truth is, chimpanzees are evolutionary supermen, possessing physical abilities that are so far beyond human capacity that they seem almost supernatural. While we were busy developing bigger brains, chimpanzees were becoming the ultimate biological machines, optimized for pure physical power in ways that will absolutely blow your mind. Let's start with a fact that will shatter everything you think you know about physical strength. An average adult chimpanzee is approximately 5 to 7 times stronger than an average adult human. Not 50% stronger, not twice as strong, 5 to 7 times stronger. This means that a chimpanzee weighing 120 pounds has the upper body strength equivalent to a human weighing 600 to 840 pounds. To put this in perspective, that will make your head spin. A chimpanzee could literally tear your arm off with about the same effort it takes you to open a stubborn jar of pickles. This isn't hyperbole or exaggeration. This is documented scientific fact that reveals just how dramatically different our two evolutionary paths have become. But here's what's truly mind-blowing about chimpanzee strength. It's not just about bigger muscles. Chimpanzees have evolved a completely different type of muscle fiber that's optimized for explosive power rather than endurance. While human muscles contain approximately 70% slow-twitch fibers designed for sustained activity and only 30% fast-twitch fibers for quick bursts of power, chimpanzee muscles are almost exactly the opposite. They're composed of roughly 70% fast-twitch fibers that can generate enormous amounts of force almost instantaneously. This means that when a chimpanzee decides to move, their muscles can produce forces that are literally off the charts compared to human capabilities. The implications of this muscle composition difference are absolutely staggering. Chimpanzees can leap vertically over 6 feet from a standing position, swing through trees at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour, and generate grip strength that measures over 1,300 pounds per square inch, more than enough to crush human bones like twigs. Their reaction times are so fast that they can catch objects thrown at them that would be impossible for humans to even see clearly. And their hand-eye coordination is so precise that they can navigate through dense forest canopies at high speed without ever missing a branch or making a wrong move. What makes this even more incredible is that these physical abilities aren't just impressive party tricks. They represent a completely different approach to intelligence and problem solving than the one humans developed. While we tend to think of intelligence as something that happens in the brain, chimpanzees have developed what scientists call embodied intelligence, a form of cognitive processing that's distributed throughout their entire muscular and nervous system. Their bodies are literally thinking machines, capable of processing spatial information, calculating trajectories, and making split-second decisions at speeds that would make the fastest human athletes look like they're moving in slow motion. The evolutionary trade-offs between brain power and brawn become even more fascinating when you realize that bigger brains and stronger muscles are actually incompatible evolutionary strategies. The human brain consumes approximately 20% of our total metabolic energy, even though it only represents about 2% of our body weight. This enormous energy demand means that humans have had to sacrifice muscle mass and bone density to fuel our oversized brains. Chimpanzees made the opposite choice. They invested their metabolic resources in building and maintaining the most powerful primate bodies ever evolved, while keeping their brains at a size that's perfectly adequate for their lifestyle but doesn't drain energy away from their physical capabilities. This metabolic trade-off explains one of the most surprising differences between humans and chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are actually much better than humans at certain types of cognitive tasks, particularly those that require rapid visual processing and immediate decision-making. In controlled laboratory tests, chimpanzees consistently outperform humans at memory games that require quickly identifying and remembering the locations of numbers or symbols on a screen. Their visual processing speed is so fast that they can memorize complex patterns in fractions of a second that would take humans several seconds to even comprehend. What's absolutely mind-bending about these cognitive differences is that they reveal intelligence to be far more diverse and specialized than we typically imagine. We tend to think of human intelligence as the gold standard against which all other forms of cognition should be measured. But chimpanzee intelligence is optimized for completely different challenges. Their brains are specialized for real-time spatial navigation, rapid threat assessment, and instantaneous decision-making in three-dimensional environments where a single mistake could result in a fatal fall from 100 feet above the forest floor. The specialization goes even deeper than cognitive processing. It extends to the very structure of chimpanzee sensory systems. Chimpanzees have visual acuity that's superior to humans in many respects, particularly when it comes to detecting movement and distinguishing between similar colors and patterns. Their hearing is more acute across a wider range of frequencies, allowing them to detect sounds that would be completely inaudible to human ears. Their sense of touch is so refined that they can identify objects and assess their properties through tactile exploration that would seem almost magical to human observers. Perhaps most shocking of all is the realization that chimpanzee intelligence includes forms of cognition that humans have completely lost or never developed in the first place. Chimpanzees possess what scientists call photographic or eidetic memory for visual information, allowing them to perfectly recall complex spatial arrangements after just a brief glance. This ability is so pronounced that when researchers show chimpanzees a screen full of randomly arranged numbers for just a fraction of a second, the chimpanzees can remember the exact location of every number and touch them in ascending order faster than humans can even process what they're seeing. The evolutionary success of the chimpanzee strategy becomes even more impressive when you consider the environments they've mastered. Dense tropical forests are among the most challenging environments on Earth for large mammals to navigate. The three-dimensional maze of branches, leaves, and obstacles requires constant split-second decision-making about which branches can support your weight, which routes will lead to food sources, and how to move efficiently through a space where a single misstep could be fatal. Chimpanzees have evolved to excel in this environment in ways that humans could never match, even with all our technological assistance. The contrast between human and chimpanzee evolutionary strategies reveals something profound about the nature of intelligence itself. Humans developed what we might call abstract intelligence, the ability to think about things that aren't immediately present, to plan for future scenarios, and to manipulate symbols and concepts in our minds. This type of intelligence allowed us to develop language, tools, and eventually technology that could amplify our relatively weak physical capabilities. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, developed what we might call embodied intelligence, a form of cognition that's perfectly integrated with their physical capabilities and optimized for real-time interaction with their environment. Neither strategy is inherently superior to the other. They're simply different solutions to different environmental challenges. Human intelligence allows us to modify our environment to suit our needs, while chimpanzee intelligence allows them to perfectly adapt to their environment without needing to change it. Both approaches have been enormously successful in their respective contexts, producing species that are perfectly suited to their ecological niches and capable of thriving in ways that would be impossible for the other. The brain power versus brawn dichotomy also reveals something crucial about evolutionary constraints and possibilities. Every evolutionary choice involves trade-offs, and the paths that humans and chimpanzees chose represent two different ways of allocating the limited resources available to a primate body. We chose to invest heavily in neural tissue that could support complex cognition, while sacrificing physical power and sensory acuity. Chimpanzees chose to optimize their bodies for immediate physical interaction with their environment, while maintaining brain function that's perfectly adequate for their needs, but doesn't require the enormous metabolic investment that human brains demand. Understanding these different evolutionary strategies completely changes how we think about human uniqueness and our relationship to other primates. We're not more evolved than chimpanzees. We're differently evolved, having pursued a cognitive strategy that's allowed us to dominate through technology and cooperation rather than through individual physical prowess. Chimpanzees represent an equally valid and equally successful evolutionary experiment, one that's produced some of the most physically capable and cognitively specialized animals ever to evolve on Earth. Prepare to have your understanding of social evolution completely obliterated by one of the most shocking discoveries in primatology, a revelation so profound that it exposes the fundamental differences between human and chimpanzee societies in ways that will make you question everything you thought you knew about cooperation, competition, and what it truly means to be social. While we've been celebrating human society as the pinnacle of cooperative achievement, we've been completely blind to the fact that chimpanzee societies operate according to rules that are so complex, so sophisticated, and so utterly different from our own that they represent an entirely alternative form of social intelligence that puts our own social systems to shame in ways you never imagined possible. Here's something that will absolutely shatter your perception of chimpanzee society. Chimpanzees live in what scientists call fission-fusion societies, social systems so dynamic and complex that they make human social structures look primitive by comparison. Unlike human societies, which are based on relatively stable group memberships and clear social roles, chimpanzee societies are in constant flux, with individuals constantly joining and leaving subgroups based on a bewildering array of factors, including food availability, reproductive status, kinship relationships, political alliances, and personal preferences. At any given moment, a chimpanzee community might be split into dozens of different subgroups of varying sizes, each pursuing different activities and maintaining different social dynamics. What makes this system absolutely mind-blowing is that every individual chimpanzee must constantly track the social status, relationships, and current affiliations of potentially hundreds of other individuals across multiple shifting subgroups. This requires a form of social intelligence that's so sophisticated it makes human social cognition look like child's play. Chimpanzees must remember who is allied with who is in conflict with who outranks whom in various contexts, and how all of these relationships change over time as individuals move between different subgroups and form new alliances. But here's where things get truly shocking. Chimpanzee societies are simultaneously more competitive and more cooperative than human societies, but in ways that operate according to completely different principles than human social systems. While humans have developed elaborate cultural mechanisms for suppressing individual competition in favor of group cooperation, chimpanzees have evolved social systems that seamlessly integrate intense individual competition with sophisticated forms of group cooperation. They can switch from fierce competitors to cooperative allies and back again multiple times within a single day, depending on the social context and the specific challenges they're facing. The complexity of chimpanzee political systems is so staggering that it reads like something out of a Machiavellian thriller. Male chimpanzees engage in political maneuvering that involves forming and breaking alliances, manipulating social relationships, and using sophisticated strategies of deception and cooperation to advance their position in the social hierarchy. They form coalitions to overthrow dominant individuals, broker peace between conflicting parties, and use their social connections to gain access to resources and mating opportunities. The level of strategic thinking required to navigate these political landscapes is so advanced that it suggests forms of cognition that we're only beginning to understand. Female chimpanzee societies are equally complex, but operate according to entirely different social rules. Female chimpanzees form long-term alliances based primarily on kinship relationships, but these alliances are maintained through constant social interaction, mutual grooming, and sophisticated systems of reciprocal support. Mothers form alliances with other mothers to protect their offspring, share information about food sources, and provide mutual assistance during conflicts. These female alliances often persist for decades and can span multiple generations, creating social networks that are incredibly stable despite the overall fluidity of chimpanzee society. What's absolutely mind-bending about these social systems is that they require forms of communication that are far more sophisticated than most people realize. Chimpanzees have developed gestural communication systems that include dozens of distinct signals, each with specific meanings that can be modified based on context, audience, and social relationships. They use facial expressions, body postures, vocalizations, and complex sequences of gestures to convey information about their intentions, emotional states, and social relationships. Recent research has revealed that chimpanzee communication includes elements of syntax and grammar, suggesting that their gestural languages are far more structured and rule-based than previously imagined. The contrast with human social systems is absolutely striking and reveals fundamental differences in how our two species approach the challenges of living in groups. Human societies are based on what anthropologists call institutional cooperation. We create formal rules, social roles, and cultural institutions that allow large numbers of unrelated individuals to cooperate effectively. Our social systems are designed to minimize competition and conflict by establishing clear hierarchies, division of labor, and systems of resource distribution that reduce the need for constant negotiation and conflict resolution. Chimpanzee societies, by contrast, are based on what we might call dynamic cooperation. They maintain social cohesion through constant negotiation, relationship management, and real-time conflict resolution. Instead of relying on fixed rules and roles, chimpanzees must constantly read social situations, assess the motivations and intentions of other individuals, and adjust their behavior accordingly. This requires a form of social intelligence that's incredibly demanding, but also incredibly flexible, allowing chimpanzee societies to adapt rapidly to changing circumstances without the need for formal institutional change. Perhaps most shocking of all is the realization that chimpanzee societies include forms of social behavior that humans have completely lost or never developed. Chimpanzees engage in sophisticated forms of consolation behavior, where individuals who weren't involved in a conflict will approach and comfort the losers, helping to reduce social tension and maintain group cohesion. They show evidence of empathy and perspective-taking that allows them to understand and respond to the emotional states of other individuals. They engage in altruistic behaviors that provide benefits to other individuals at cost to themselves, even when there's no immediate prospect of reciprocation. The evolutionary implications of these different social systems are absolutely staggering. Human social evolution has been driven by what scientists call group selection, the tendency for more cooperative groups to outcompete less cooperative groups, leading to the evolution of psychological mechanisms that promote group loyalty and suppress individual competition. This has resulted in human societies that are incredibly effective at large-scale cooperation, but relatively poor at managing within group competition and conflict. Chimpanzee social evolution, by contrast, has been driven primarily by individual selection within highly competitive social environments. This has resulted in social systems that are incredibly sophisticated at managing competition and conflict, but less effective at achieving large-scale cooperation. Chimpanzees excel at the kind of small group social dynamics that characterized most of human evolutionary history, but they lack the psychological mechanisms that allow humans to cooperate effectively in large groups of unrelated individuals. What makes these differences even more remarkable is that they reveal social intelligence to be far more diverse and specialized than we typically imagine. We tend to think of social intelligence as a single trait that can be measured on a linear scale, with humans at the top and other animals arranged below us in order of their social sophistication. But the reality is that social intelligence comes in many different forms, each adapted to different social environments and different evolutionary pressures. Chimpanzee social intelligence is optimized for managing complex dynamic relationships in small groups, where every individual knows every other individual personally. This requires incredible sophistication in reading social cues, remembering relationship histories, and predicting the behavior of other individuals based on their personality traits and current social circumstances. Human social intelligence, by contrast, is optimized for cooperating with large numbers of strangers based on shared cultural rules and institutions rather than personal relationships. The study of of social structures, has also revealed something profound about the evolutionary origins of human morality and ethics. Many of the behaviors that we consider to be uniquely human moral traits, fairness, reciprocity, consolation, and even rudimentary forms of justice, can be observed in chimpanzee societies. This suggests that the psychological foundations of human morality evolved long before humans became human, as adaptations for living in complex social groups where cooperation and competition must be carefully balanced. Understanding these different approaches to social organization completely changes how we think about human uniqueness and our relationship to other primates. We're not more social than chimpanzees. We're differently social, having evolved mechanisms for large-scale cooperation that allow us to form massive societies of strangers, while chimpanzees have evolved mechanisms for managing intense social relationships within smaller groups. Both approaches represent sophisticated solutions to the fundamental challenge of living with others, and both have been enormously successful in their respective contexts. Here's a revelation that will completely revolutionize how you understand evolution and expose one of the most overlooked forces that shape the divergence between humans and chimpanzees: genetic drift, a process so powerful and so random that it could have easily prevented human intelligence from ever evolving at all. While we've been focusing on natural selection as the driving force of evolution, we've been ignoring the fact that pure chance, operating through genetic drift, has played an absolutely massive role in determining which traits become common in populations and which disappear forever. This isn't just a minor footnote in evolutionary theory. It's a fundamental force that could have completely altered the course of human evolution. And understanding it will shatter everything you thought you knew about why we became human while chimpanzees remained chimpanzees. Genetic drift is evolution's equivalent of rolling dice with the fate of entire species. And here's what will blow your mind. The smaller the population, the more powerful genetic drift becomes, until it can completely overwhelm natural selection and determine evolutionary outcomes through pure random chance. This means that during the critical periods when human and chimpanzee lineages were diverging, when populations were small and isolated, genetic drift was potentially more important than natural selection in determining which genetic variants survived and which were lost forever. The implications of this are absolutely staggering. It means that human intelligence, language, and all of our most distinctive traits could have easily been lost to random chance if genetic drift had operated slightly differently. What makes genetic drift particularly mind-bending is that it operates completely independently of whether a trait is beneficial, harmful, or neutral, while natural selection favors traits that improve survival and reproduction. Genetic drift can cause beneficial traits to disappear from populations and harmful traits to become fixed, simply due to the random sampling of genes from one generation to the next. This is especially powerful in small populations, where a few chance deaths or reproductive failures can cause entire genetic lineages to vanish without regard to their adaptive value. Here's something that will absolutely shock you. Scientists have calculated that human populations went through at least one, and possibly several, severe bottlenecks during our evolutionary history, with the entire human species potentially reduced to as few as 1,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals. During these bottlenecks, genetic drift would have been incredibly powerful, randomly eliminating huge amounts of genetic variation and potentially determining which traits survived in the human lineage purely by chance. The fact that the genetic variants associated with human intelligence survived these bottlenecks may have been as much due to luck as to natural selection. The evidence for these population bottlenecks is written directly into our DNA in ways that are both fascinating and terrifying. When scientists compare human genetic diversity to that of other great ape species, they find something absolutely shocking. All of modern humanity has less genetic diversity than a single community of chimpanzees in a small African forest. This means that at some point in our evolutionary history, our species was reduced to such a small population that we lost most of our genetic variation, and everything that makes humans distinctive today evolved from this tiny surviving remnant. What's even more mind-blowing is that we can actually trace the effects of genetic drift in specific genes that are crucial for human cognition and behavior. The FOXP2 gene, which is essential for language development, shows clear signatures of having gone through genetic drift during human evolution. Variants of this gene that might have produced different forms of language ability were randomly lost from human populations, not because they were inferior, but simply because the individuals who carried them happened to die or fail to reproduce due to random chance. The comparison with chimpanzee populations reveals just how differently genetic drift has operated in our two lineages. Chimpanzee populations have remained relatively large and stable throughout their evolutionary history, which means that genetic drift has been much weaker in shaping their evolution. This has allowed chimpanzees to maintain much higher levels of genetic diversity, with multiple variants of important genes coexisting within populations. In contrast, humans have gone through repeated bottlenecks that have eliminated most genetic variants, leaving us with a much more genetically uniform species. This difference in genetic diversity has profound implications for understanding why humans and chimpanzees evolved along different paths. In large, genetically diverse populations like those of chimpanzees, evolution tends to be more conservative, with natural selection fine-tuning existing adaptations rather than producing dramatic changes. In small populations that experience strong genetic drift, evolution can be much more erratic and can produce rapid changes simply because chance events eliminate entire categories of genetic variation. Here's something that will completely change how you think about human evolution. Many of the traits that we consider most distinctively human may have become fixed in our lineage not because they were strongly favored by natural selection, but because genetic drift randomly eliminated the alternatives. The specific form of human intelligence that we possess today might be just one of many possible forms of intelligence that could have evolved in our lineage, with the others lost to genetic drift rather than natural selection. The power of genetic drift in human evolution becomes even more apparent when we consider the evolution of human brain size. The dramatic increase in brain size that occurred during human evolution required coordinated changes in dozens of different genes affecting skull development, brain structure, and metabolism. The probability that all of these changes would occur together in the same lineage purely through natural selection is actually quite low. But in small populations experiencing strong genetic drift, coordinated changes in multiple traits can occur much more easily, simply because random sampling effects can cause entire suites of traits to become fixed together. What makes this even more remarkable is that genetic drift can create what scientists call evolutionary cascades. Situations where one random change makes other changes more likely, creating a chain reaction of evolutionary modifications. In the human lineage, the random fixation of genes affecting brain development may have created conditions that made further brain-related changes more likely, leading to a cascade of cognitive evolution that was initiated by chance but then sustained by natural selection. The role of genetic drift in human evolution also explains some of the most puzzling aspects of our evolutionary history. Why did human intelligence evolve so rapidly compared to other primates? Why are humans so genetically uniform compared to other great ape species? Why do we have such distinctive traits that are found nowhere else in the animal kingdom? The answer to all of these questions may involve genetic drift operating in small, isolated populations that were subject to random evolutionary changes that would have been impossible in larger, more stable populations. Perhaps most shocking of all is the realization that genetic drift is still operating in human populations today, and it could potentially undo millions of years of human evolution if circumstances change in the wrong way. If human populations were to become severely reduced due to environmental catastrophe, disease, or other factors, genetic drift could once again become the dominant force in human evolution, potentially eliminating many of the traits that we consider essential to human nature. The comparison between genetic drift in human and chimpanzee evolution reveals something profound about the role of chance in shaping life on Earth. While we like to think of evolution as a progressive process that inevitably produces more complex and intelligent organisms, the reality is that evolution is heavily influenced by random events that could easily have produced completely different outcomes. The fact that humans evolved intelligence while chimpanzees didn't may have been as much due to chance as to natural selection. Understanding genetic drift also changes how we think about the future of human evolution. In our modern world of large interconnected populations, genetic drift is much weaker than it was during most of human evolutionary history. This means that future human evolution will likely be dominated by natural selection rather than random chance. But it also means that we're unlikely to see the kinds of rapid, dramatic evolutionary changes that characterized our species' past. The story of genetic drift reveals evolution to be far more contingent and unpredictable than we typically imagine. The traits that define humanity today, our intelligence, our language abilities, our capacity for cooperation, might never have evolved if genetic drift had operated slightly differently during critical periods in our evolutionary history. This doesn't diminish the importance of these traits, but it does reveal that human evolution was far more dependent on chance events than we usually acknowledge. Genetic drift represents the ultimate reminder that evolution has no predetermined direction or goal. The divergence between humans and chimpanzees wasn't inevitable. It was the result of a complex interplay between natural selection, environmental change, and random genetic processes that could easily have produced completely different outcomes. Understanding this helps us appreciate both the uniqueness of human evolution and the remarkable diversity of evolutionary solutions that are possible when different combinations of evolutionary forces operate on different populations over time. Prepare to have your entire understanding of evolutionary success completely turned upside down by one of the most shocking revelations in modern biology. A discovery so profound that it exposes the fundamental flaw in how we measure evolutionary achievement and reveals both humans and chimpanzees to be equally spectacular examples of evolutionary perfection, but in ways so radically different that they represent two completely separate definitions of what it means to be successful on this planet. While we've been obsessing over human intelligence as the ultimate evolutionary triumph, we've been blind to the fact that chimpanzees have achieved something equally remarkable. They've become the perfect forest-dwelling primates, so exquisitely adapted to their environment that they represent one of the most successful evolutionary specializations in the entire history of life on Earth. Here's something that will completely shatter your perception of evolutionary success. Chimpanzees are not evolutionary failures who got left behind in human development. They are evolutionary specialists who have achieved a level of adaptation to their environment that's so perfect, so precisely calibrated, that it makes human adaptations look crude and inefficient by comparison. While humans have become generalists who can survive in almost any environment through technology and cultural adaptation, chimpanzees have become the ultimate specialists, perfectly optimized for life in African tropical forests in ways that no other primate species can match. The specialization of chimpanzees is so complete and so sophisticated that it extends to every aspect of their biology, behavior, and social organization. Their hands, for example, are not primitive versions of human hands. They are precision instruments specifically designed for manipulating objects in three-dimensional forest environments. Chimpanzee hands are longer and more curved than human hands, with specialized proportions that allow them to maintain secure grips on branches while moving at high speeds through the forest canopy. Their fingers are incredibly strong and dexterous, capable of delicate manipulations that would be impossible for human hands to perform. What's absolutely mind-blowing about chimpanzee specialization is that it includes cognitive adaptations that are specifically tuned to the demands of forest life in ways that make human cognition look almost primitive in comparison. Chimpanzees possess what scientists call spatial memory capabilities that are so advanced they seem almost supernatural. They can remember the exact locations of thousands of individual fruit trees across territories spanning dozens of square miles, tracking which trees produce fruit at different times of year, and planning complex foraging routes that maximize caloric intake while minimizing travel time and energy expenditure. This spatial cognition extends to an understanding of forest ecology that's so sophisticated it reads like an advanced university course in tropical biology. Chimpanzees know which plants to use for different medicinal purposes, understanding the specific properties of hundreds of different species, and how to combine them for maximum therapeutic effect. They understand the complex relationships between different animal species, knowing which sounds indicate the presence of predators and which indicate potential food sources. They can predict weather patterns and seasonal changes with remarkable accuracy, adjusting their behavior in anticipation of environmental shifts that won't become apparent for weeks or months. The tool use capabilities of chimpanzees reveal a form of intelligence that's been perfectly calibrated to their environment through millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Unlike human tool use, which is based on general-purpose cognitive abilities that can be applied to any problem, chimpanzee tool use is highly specialized for specific forest-related tasks. They manufacture different types of tools for different purposes. Thin, flexible probes for extracting insects from narrow crevices, thick, sturdy sticks for digging up roots, and carefully shaped leaves for collecting water or cleaning wounds. What makes this tool use even more remarkable is that it's culturally transmitted through sophisticated teaching and learning processes that have created distinct regional cultures with different tool-making traditions. Chimpanzee communities separated by just a few hundred miles have developed completely different approaches to solving the same environmental challenges, creating a diversity of technological traditions that rivals anything seen in human cultures. These cultural differences are maintained through active teaching, where experienced individuals demonstrate techniques to younger chimpanzees and correct their mistakes until they achieve mastery. The social specialization of chimpanzees is equally impressive, representing a form of social organization that's been perfectly adapted to the demands of life in dense tropical forests. Chimpanzee societies are structured to maximize the benefits of group living while minimizing the costs of competition and conflict. Their fission-fusion social system allows them to adjust group size dynamically based on resource availability, forming large groups when food is abundant and splitting into smaller groups when resources are scarce. Here's something that will blow your mind about chimpanzee dietary specialization. They have evolved digestive systems that can extract nutrients from foods that would be completely indigestible to humans. Chimpanzees can derive substantial nutrition from fibrous leaves, bark, and other plant materials that humans couldn't process even with modern technology. Their gut microbiome is so specialized that it contains bacterial species found nowhere else on Earth, microorganisms that have co-evolved with chimpanzees to help them break down complex plant compounds that no other primate can digest. The physiological specializations of chimpanzees extend to every system in their bodies. Their cardiovascular system is optimized for the kind of intense, intermittent physical activity required for forest life, with hearts that can rapidly adjust to the demands of explosive movement through the trees. Their respiratory system is designed to function efficiently at different altitudes and activity levels, allowing them to maintain high levels of performance. Whether they're resting quietly in the canopy or engaging in high-speed chases through the forest. What's particularly shocking about chimpanzee specialization is that it includes sensory adaptations that give them capabilities humans have completely lost. Chimpanzees can detect chemical signals that are completely undetectable to humans, using their sense of smell to track the emotional states of other individuals, identify kinship relationships, and locate food sources from remarkable distances. Their hearing is tuned to frequencies that are optimal for forest communication, allowing them to distinguish between dozens of different vocalizations that all sound identical to human ears. The success of chimpanzee specialization becomes even more apparent when you consider their longevity and reproductive success in their natural environment. Wild chimpanzees can live for over 60 years, maintaining high levels of physical performance and cognitive function throughout most of their lives. Females continue to reproduce successfully into their 40s and 50s, raising offspring that have some of the highest survival rates of any wild primate species. This reproductive success is a direct result of their perfect adaptation to forest environments, where their specialized abilities give them consistent access to food, water, and safe sleeping sites. Perhaps most remarkable of all is the realization that chimpanzee specialization has achieved something that human evolution has not: perfect sustainability. Chimpanzee populations have maintained stable relationships with their forest ecosystems for millions of years, using resources in ways that enhance rather than degrade environmental quality. Their foraging behaviors actually increase forest biodiversity by dispersing seeds and creating small clearings that allow new plant species to establish themselves. Their presence in forest ecosystems makes those ecosystems more resilient and more productive, creating a positive feedback loop that benefits both chimpanzees and countless other species. The contrast with human evolutionary strategy couldn't be more stark. While humans have achieved incredible success through generalization and technological adaptation, this success has come at enormous environmental costs and has created dependencies on resources and technologies that make human survival increasingly precarious. Chimpanzees have achieved evolutionary success through specialization that makes them completely self-sufficient and perfectly integrated with their environment. Understanding chimpanzee specialization completely changes how we evaluate evolutionary success and human uniqueness. Chimpanzees aren't failed humans. They're successful chimpanzees, representing an alternative approach to evolutionary adaptation that's been just as successful as the human approach, but in completely different ways. Their specialization reveals evolution's incredible creativity in finding different solutions to the challenge of survival, and their success demonstrates that there are many different ways to be a successful primate on this planet. The story of chimpanzee specialization also reveals something profound about the nature of intelligence itself. We tend to think of intelligence as a single trait that can be measured on a linear scale. But chimpanzee cognition shows us that intelligence is actually a collection of specialized abilities that can be optimized for different environments and different challenges. Chimpanzee intelligence is no less sophisticated than human intelligence. It's just specialized for different purposes and calibrated to different environmental demands. This understanding forces us to reconsider what we mean by evolutionary progress and success. Neither humans nor chimpanzees represent a more advanced or successful form of evolution. They represent different experiments in what it means to be a large-brained primate, each perfectly adapted to their respective environments, and each representing millions of years of specialized evolutionary refinement that has produced remarkable and unique forms of biological success. Prepare to have your mind completely blown by the most cutting-edge scientific discoveries that are revolutionizing our understanding of human and chimpanzee evolution right now. Evidence so fresh, so groundbreaking, and so paradigm-shattering that it's forcing scientists to completely rewrite textbooks and abandon decades of established thinking about what makes us human. While we've been relying on fossils and comparative anatomy to understand our evolutionary history, new technologies are revealing secrets locked within our DNA, our brains, and even our individual cells that tell a story of human and chimpanzee evolution so much more complex and shocking than anyone ever imagined. This isn't just updating old knowledge. This is discovering entirely new dimensions of evolutionary biology that are changing our fundamental understanding of life itself. The revolution began with the development of ancient DNA extraction techniques so precise and so powerful that scientists can now read genetic information from specimens hundreds of thousands of years old. But here's what will absolutely shatter your understanding of human evolution. When scientists applied these techniques to Neanderthal and Denisovan fossils, they discovered something that should have been impossible according to everything we thought we knew about human evolution. Modern humans didn't just coexist with these other human species. We interbred with them extensively, and their genes are still flowing through human populations today. Every person of non-African ancestry carries between 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genome, meaning that human evolution involved far more genetic mixing and hybridization than anyone ever suspected. But this discovery was just the beginning of a series of revelations that are completely transforming our understanding of primate evolution. When scientists began applying the same ancient DNA techniques to chimpanzee evolution, they discovered something equally shocking. Chimpanzees have also been interbreeding with other species throughout their evolutionary history. Genetic analysis reveals that modern chimpanzees carry DNA from at least two other extinct ape species, meaning that chimpanzee evolution has been just as complex and hybridization-driven as human evolution. This completely destroys the simple tree-like model of primate evolution that we've been using for decades and reveals evolution to be far more network-like, with genes flowing between species in ways that create incredibly complex evolutionary relationships. What's even more mind-blowing is what modern neuroscience is revealing about the differences between human and chimpanzee brains. Using advanced neuroimaging techniques that can map brain structure and function at unprecedented resolution, scientists have discovered that the differences between human and chimpanzee brains are far more dramatic than anyone imagined, but not in the ways you would expect. While human brains are larger overall, chimpanzee brains show remarkable specializations that in some cases exceed human capabilities. The visual processing centers in chimpanzee brains are more highly developed than those in human brains, allowing them to process visual information at speeds that make human visual processing look sluggish by comparison. Perhaps most shocking of all is what scientists are discovering through real-time brain monitoring of chimpanzees engaged in cognitive tasks. Using non-invasive brain imaging techniques, researchers can now watch chimpanzee brains in action as they solve problems, make decisions, and interact socially. What they're finding is that chimpanzee cognition operates according to principles that are fundamentally different from human cognition, but equally sophisticated in their own way. Chimpanzee brains show patterns of neural activity that suggest they're processing multiple streams of information simultaneously in ways that human brains simply cannot match. The application of CRISPR gene editing technology to primate research is revealing even more shocking differences between humans and chimpanzees at the cellular level. Scientists can now edit specific genes in cell cultures and observe exactly how genetic differences translate into functional differences in cellular behavior. When they edit human genes to match chimpanzee sequences or vice versa, they discover that tiny genetic changes can have enormous effects on cell function, brain development, and behavior. These experiments are revealing that the 1.2% genetic difference between humans and chimpanzees has been amplified through complex developmental processes to create differences that are far more profound than the small genetic distance would suggest. Modern proteomics, the study of all proteins produced by an organism, is uncovering another layer of shocking differences between humans and chimpanzees. While our DNA may be 98.8% identical, the proteins that our genes actually produce show much larger differences. Human and chimpanzee cells produce different versions of thousands of proteins, and these protein differences affect everything from brain function to immune system response to muscle development. This means that the functional differences between humans and chimpanzees are much larger than genetic comparisons alone would suggest. What's absolutely revolutionary about modern evolutionary research is the development of molecular clocks so precise that they can time evolutionary events to within thousands of years. Using these techniques, scientists have discovered that human and chimpanzee evolution has been far more dynamic and rapid than previously thought. Both species have undergone periods of extremely rapid evolutionary change, with some genes showing signs of intense natural selection that occurred within just the last few 100,000 years. This reveals that neither humans nor chimpanzees are ancient, stable species. Both are products of recent, rapid evolutionary innovation. The most mind-bending discovery of all comes from epigenetics, the study of how gene expression can be modified without changing the DNA sequence itself. Scientists have discovered that humans and chimpanzees show dramatic differences in epigenetic regulation, meaning that identical genes can be turned on or off in completely different patterns in the two species. These epigenetic differences can be inherited across generations and can cause the same genetic sequence to produce completely different developmental outcomes in humans versus chimpanzees. Modern field research, using GPS tracking, accelerometers, and other high-tech monitoring equipment, is revealing chimpanzee behaviors that were completely unknown until very recently. Wild chimpanzees have been observed using tools in ways that rival human technological sophistication, engaging in complex mathematical reasoning when making foraging decisions, and displaying forms of cultural transmission that are far more sophisticated than anyone imagined. Some chimpanzee populations have been observed using sequences of different tools in specific orders to accomplish complex tasks, behavior that requires the kind of sequential planning that was thought to be uniquely human. Perhaps most shocking is what modern genomics is revealing about the pace of ongoing evolution in both humans and chimpanzees. Contrary to popular belief, evolution hasn't stopped in either species. It's actually accelerated. Human populations show clear genetic signatures of natural selection that has occurred within just the last 10,000 years since the development of agriculture. Chimpanzee populations show similarly recent evolutionary changes, with different populations adapting to local environmental conditions in ways that are producing measurable genetic differences. The application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to evolutionary data is uncovering patterns that human researchers never could have detected on their own. AI analysis of genomic data has identified hundreds of previously unknown genes that have undergone rapid evolution in the human lineage, many of which are involved in brain development and cognitive function. Similar analysis of chimpanzee genomes has revealed equally rapid evolution in genes related to immune function, muscle development, and social behavior. Modern isotope analysis of ancient fossils is revealing details about the diets, environments, and behaviors of extinct human and chimpanzee ancestors that read like detective stories. Scientists can now determine exactly what individual fossils ate during their lifetimes, what kind of environment they lived in, and even how much time they spent in trees versus on the ground. This analysis has revealed that early human evolution was far more variable than previously thought, with different populations experimenting with completely different lifestyles and dietary strategies. The development of virtual paleontology using high-resolution CT scanning and 3D modeling is allowing scientists to examine fossil specimens in ways that were impossible just a few years ago. Internal structures that were previously hidden can now be examined in detail, revealing information about brain development, inner ear structure, and other anatomical features that provide crucial insights into the behavior and capabilities of extinct species. What emerges from all of this modern evidence is a picture of human and chimpanzee evolution that's far more complex, dynamic, and ongoing than anyone ever imagined. Both species are products of rapid, recent evolutionary change, both continue to evolve today, and both represent equally sophisticated solutions to different environmental challenges. The evidence reveals that there's no such thing as a more evolved or less evolved species. There are only different evolutionary experiments, each perfectly adapted to their specific circumstances, and each continuing to change in response to new challenges and opportunities. This modern evidence completely transforms our understanding of what it means to be human and what it means to be a chimpanzee, revealing both species to be dynamic, evolving, and incredibly sophisticated products of one of the most creative and powerful forces in the universe, evolution itself. Here's the most mind-shattering truth of all, something so profound and so revolutionary that it will completely transform how you think about evolution, humanity, and our place in the universe. Evolution never stopped. Right now, at this very moment, as you're watching this video, both humans and chimpanzees are continuing to evolve at a pace that would have been unimaginable to scientists just a few decades ago. This isn't some distant process that happened millions of years ago and then conveniently stopped when textbooks were written. Evolution is happening in real time, reshaping both species in ways that are so dramatic and so rapid that we can actually observe evolutionary changes occurring within single human lifetimes. What's absolutely shocking is that modern humans are evolving faster than at any other time in our species' history. And chimpanzees are undergoing equally dramatic evolutionary changes that are transforming them into something subtly but significantly different from their ancestors of just a few centuries ago. The evidence for ongoing human evolution is so overwhelming and so undeniable that it's forcing scientists to completely abandon the idea that modern civilization has somehow exempted us from evolutionary pressures. Genetic analysis of human populations reveals clear signatures of natural selection that has occurred within just the last 10,000 years. A mere blink of an eye in evolutionary terms. Some of the most dramatic examples involve genes related to diet and disease resistance, where entire populations have evolved new genetic variants that allow them to digest foods or resist diseases that would have been fatal to their ancestors. The evolution of lactose tolerance in some human populations represents one of the fastest evolutionary changes ever documented, occurring in some groups in as little as 3,000 years. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind about current human evolution. It's not just about adapting to traditional environmental pressures like climate and disease. Modern humans are evolving in response to entirely new selective pressures that have never existed before in the history of life on Earth. The advent of modern medicine, urbanization, and global travel has created evolutionary pressures that are unlike anything our ancestors ever faced. Populations in different parts of the world are evolving different immune system adaptations to deal with novel pathogens, different metabolic adaptations to cope with modern diets, and even different reproductive strategies in response to changing social and economic conditions. What's particularly shocking is that human evolution is accelerating rather than slowing down. The large population sizes and global connectivity that characterize modern human society might seem like they would slow evolutionary change, but they're actually speeding it up by creating more opportunities for beneficial mutations to arise and spread rapidly through populations. Scientists estimate that the rate of evolutionary change in humans has increased by more than 100-fold since the development of agriculture. making modern humans one of the fastest evolving large mammals on the planet. The ongoing evolution of chimpanzees is equally dramatic, but operates according to completely different principles than human evolution. While human evolution is being driven primarily by cultural and technological changes, chimpanzee evolution is being shaped by habitat fragmentation, climate change, and direct human interference with their environments. Different chimpanzee populations are evolving in isolation from each other as forests become fragmented, leading to rapid genetic divergence that's creating what are essentially new subspecies of chimpanzees in real time. What's absolutely mind-bending about chimpanzee evolution is that it includes behavioral and cultural changes that are happening so rapidly they can be observed within the lifetimes of individual researchers. New tool use behaviors are appearing and spreading through chimpanzee populations at unprecedented rates, with some communities developing entirely new technological traditions within just a few decades. These cultural innovations are driving genetic changes as well, with populations that use different tools showing measurable differences in hand and arm anatomy that have evolved in just a few generations. Perhaps most shocking of all is the realization that humans and chimpanzees are evolving in response to each other. As human activities reshape African landscapes, chimpanzees are evolving new behaviors and even new genetic variants that help them survive in human-modified environments. Some chimpanzee populations have evolved increased tolerance for human presence, different foraging strategies that allow them to exploit human-created habitats, and even changes in their stress response systems that help them cope with the psychological pressures of living near human settlements. The evolutionary arms race between humans and disease-causing organisms represents one of the most dramatic examples of ongoing evolution in both species. As humans develop new medical technologies and treatments, pathogens evolve resistance mechanisms at unprecedented rates, forcing continued evolutionary responses in human immune systems. This process is happening so quickly that scientists can track evolutionary changes in both human and pathogen populations from year to year, revealing evolution in action at a pace that makes long-term evolutionary studies look slow by comparison. What makes current evolution even more remarkable is that it's occurring in both genetic and epigenetic dimensions simultaneously. Epigenetic changes, modifications in gene expression that don't involve changes to DNA sequences, can occur much more rapidly than traditional genetic evolution and can be passed from parents to offspring. Both humans and chimpanzees are showing rapid epigenetic evolution in response to environmental changes, creating heritable adaptations that can arise and spread through populations in just a few generations. The impact of climate change on ongoing evolution in both species is absolutely staggering. Rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and shifting vegetation zones are creating new selective pressures that are driving rapid evolutionary responses. Human populations in different parts of the world are showing measurable evolutionary changes in heat tolerance, metabolism, and even reproductive timing in response to changing climatic conditions. Chimpanzee populations are evolving even more rapidly, with some communities showing detectable changes in body size, coat thickness, and seasonal behavior patterns within just the last few decades. Perhaps most fascinating is the emergence of what scientists call urban evolution in both species. Humans living in urban environments are evolving different traits than those living in rural areas, with urban populations showing changes in immune function, metabolism, and even cognitive abilities that reflect adaptation to city living. Some chimpanzee populations that live near urban areas are undergoing similar evolutionary changes, developing new behaviors and even physiological adaptations that help them exploit urban environments. The technological dimension of ongoing human evolution is unlike anything that has ever existed in evolutionary history. Humans are not just evolving in response to their environment, they're actively reshaping their environment in ways that create new evolutionary pressures. The development of genetic engineering technologies means that humans are on the verge of being able to direct their own evolution consciously, potentially accelerating evolutionary change to unprecedented levels. What's absolutely mind-blowing is that we can now predict some aspects of future evolution in both humans and chimpanzees based on current trends and selective pressures. Climate models combined with genetic analysis suggest that both species will likely undergo significant evolutionary changes within the next few centuries, with some populations potentially diverging enough to be considered separate subspecies or even species. The realization that evolution is ongoing and accelerating in both humans and chimpanzees completely transforms our understanding of what these species are and what they might become. Neither humans nor chimpanzees represent fixed, stable forms. Both are dynamic, evolving entities that are constantly changing in response to new challenges and opportunities. This means that the humans and chimpanzees of the future will be measurably different from the humans and chimpanzees of today, just as we are measurably different from our ancestors of just a few thousand years ago. The continuing journey of evolution reveals life to be far more dynamic, creative, and adaptable than most people realize. Evolution isn't something that happened in the past. It's something that's happening right now, reshaping every living thing on Earth in response to an ever-changing world. Understanding this process gives us a glimpse into the incredible creativity of evolution and the endless possibilities for what life can become. The story of ongoing evolution in humans and chimpanzees is ultimately a story about the future, about the incredible potential for change, adaptation, and innovation that exists within every living system. Both species are embarked on evolutionary journeys that will continue for as long as they exist, constantly discovering new ways to survive, thrive, and explore the possibilities of what it means to be alive on this dynamic, ever-changing planet. If this incredible journey through evolution has opened your eyes to the amazing complexity of life on Earth, then you need to subscribe to the Sleepy Cosmos right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're just getting started with mind-bending content that will change how you see the universe forever.